Today, we're going to unravel one of the most incredible stories in our planet's history. It's about how life literally learned to eat sunlight. This is a story that starts on a completely alien Earth, involves a biological revolution, and ends with a toxic waste product creating the very world we live in today. Okay, let's get into it.
So I want you to picture the early Earth, and I mean a truly alien planet. For more than 2 billion years, that's half its entire life, our planet's atmosphere was completely unbreathable. Just this thick, soupy mix of volcanic gases like carbon dioxide and methane, but almost zero oxygen. This was a world where you and I would suffocate in seconds. And the oceans, forget about blue. They were this strange, murky green, just chock full of dissolved iron. It would have looked like a planet-wide pond of rusty water. And it's right there in that iron-rich soup that one of the most important events in the history of life is about to happen.
To really get this, we're going to journey through 6 key stages. We'll start in that world before oxygen. Then we'll become detectives, hunting for the first chemical echoes of life. We'll look at life's first kind of primitive attempt to eat light, cover the absolute game-changing revolution that followed, investigate a really surprising billion-year delay, and finally, we'll see how it all created the world we know.
Okay, so our story begins way back in the Archean Eon, more than 3.5 billion years ago. And the conditions on this planet, they were just incredibly harsh, almost nothing like today.
So the atmosphere was totally anoxic, no oxygen. The sun itself was actually weaker back then, but because there was no ozone layer, the surface was getting blasted with intense UV radiation. So early life had to get really creative. It survived by using processes like fermentation, or it's called chemosynthesis, which is basically eating chemicals like sulfur or iron that were bubbling up from inside the Earth.
So you might be wondering, how on Earth do we even know about life from that long ago? Well, it's a huge scientific challenge. We're basically looking for incredibly faint whispers that have somehow survived billions of years of the planet churning.
I mean, really think about that. How do you find a single microscopic cell after it's been buried, cooked, squeezed, and torn apart by geology for 3.5 billion years? The truth is, most of the direct evidence is just gone, erased by all that heat and pressure.
For a long time, the hunt for ancient life just hit a brick wall. The oldest organic molecules we could reliably find were about 1.7 billion years old. But, as you can see here, recent breakthroughs have totally changed the game, pushing that boundary way back and letting us peek into this much deeper past.
Now, the oldest physical evidence we have is just wow. We're looking at stromatolites. These things are huge layered structures. They're basically fossilized reefs, but they were built by entire communities of microbes. The ones they found in Australia are 3.43 billion years old. It shows that life wasn't just hanging on, it was organized, it was thriving, it was building entire cities.
And this is where modern tech gets really cool. Scientists are now using AI to find what they call chemical fingerprints. See, even when the cells themselves are totally gone, they leave behind these unique molecular patterns in the rock. And AI can sniff them out, giving us evidence for life even when there are no visible fossils left at all.
Okay, so with all this sunlight beaming down, it was really only a matter of time before life figured out how to use it for energy. But its first shot at this was very different from the photosynthesis we see in green plants today.
This first version is called anoxygenic photosynthesis. And that word, anoxygenic, is the key. It means no oxygen produced. So instead of splitting water molecules for power, these early microbes just used whatever was lying around in their environment, like hydrogen sulfide from volcanic vents, or, you guessed it, all that dissolved iron floating in the oceans.
The specific version that used iron is called photophorotrophy. It sounds complicated, but it just means light iron eating. And since the early oceans were packed with dissolved iron, this was probably one of the most important ways of life on the early Earth. It was the first time life really harnessed sunlight on a huge scale.
So using iron and sulfur was a great start, but those things are in limited supply. The real breakthrough, the revolution that would literally remake the entire planet, came when life figured out how to use an energy source that was, well, everywhere: water.
So what was the big upgrade? Well, it all came down to the machinery. The early version of photosynthesis had, let's say, one type of solar panel. But the new, upgraded version figured out how to wire 2 different types of solar panels together. This 2-step process gave it enough power to do something that was thought to be impossible: crack open a water molecule. And the result? A much bigger energy payout and a world-changing waste product: oxygen.
So how did this even happen? Well, one of the coolest ideas is the redox switch hypothesis.
So picture this. You've got different bacteria. One has the type I machinery, another has type 2. Then a random genetic mutation happens and it basically breaks the off switch. Suddenly, both systems are locked in the on position, working together one after the other. And just like that, they've created a biological machine powerful enough to split water.
And the organisms that pulled off this incredible evolutionary hack were the ancestors of what we now call cyanobacteria. They are the undisputed inventors of the photosynthesis we know and love, the tiny microbes that would go on to terraform an entire planet.
But here's where the story gets really weird. All the evidence suggests that cyanobacteria figured this out really early, maybe as far back as 3.5 billion years ago. So, where was all the oxygen? Why didn't the atmosphere just fill up with it right away?
This is the puzzle. Look at this chart. On the left, you've got the invention of oxygen-making photosynthesis. Way over on the right, you have the Great Oxidation Event, when the air finally filled with oxygen. And in between, a gap of over 1 billion years. That's one of the biggest mysteries in Earth's history. Why the enormous wait?
And get this, recent scientific models found something totally backwards. It seems that the earlier this new photosynthesis evolved, the longer the delay was before oxygen filled the atmosphere. Now, how does that make any sense at all? What could possibly explain that?
Well, the leading theory is something called the phosphorus bottleneck. It goes like this. Those first little puffs of oxygen from the cyanobacteria immediately reacted with all that iron in the ocean. The iron rusted and sank to the seafloor. But that process also trapped phosphorus, a vital nutrient for all life, in those sediments. So the cyanobacteria's own waste product was literally locking away their food. Without enough phosphorus, their populations just couldn't explode. Everything just stalled, and the planet's oxygenation was put on hold for 1 billion years.
But eventually, things changed. Geological shifts broke this bottleneck, and the stage was finally set for the biggest chemical revolution in our planet's history. And this is where that ancient past connects directly to us, right here, right now.
Around 2.4 billion years ago, the scales finally tipped. The Great Oxidation Event began. The oxygen being pumped out by cyanobacteria finally overwhelmed all the iron and other chemicals in the ocean, and it started to flood into the atmosphere. The world would never, ever be the same.
The planet was completely remade. The atmosphere went from unbreathable to the 21% oxygen we have today. The dominant life went from simple microbes that couldn't stand oxygen to complex life, like us, that needs it to survive. The oceans cleared up. Even the rocks on the surface of the planet changed, forming vast rusty red beds that we can still see today.
And here's the great irony in this whole story. For all the life that dominated the early Earth, oxygen was a deadly poison. The Great Oxidation Event was probably the single greatest mass extinction in history. But this toxic waste also created an unbelievable opportunity. It made a new, super-efficient way of living possible, breathing oxygen. And that provided the energy needed for complex, multicellular life to evolve. It paved the way for animals, for plants, for us.
Just think about that for a second. A tiny microbe, just going about its day, completely reshaped the chemistry of an entire planet. Its waste became the foundation for our world. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Photosynthesis remade the world with its waste. What kind of world is our waste creating?